Welcome to the August 22nd, 2017 regular meeting of the Troy Planning Commission. Copies of the agenda for tonight's meeting are available at the entrance to the room. Additionally, the agendas and minutes of prior meetings are available on the city's website. The meeting will be conducted in accordance with the agenda as presented or amended by the Planning Commission. The roles and responsibilities of the Planning Commission are outlined on the reverse side of tonight's agenda. State law establishes planning commissions. The commission is comprised of 9 members, all of whom have volunteered to serve. Members are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by city council. The other individuals seated at the table this evening are representatives of the city's planning department, the city attorney's office, and the city's planning consultant, Carlisle Wortman and Associates. If you wish to address the planning commission, please come forward when recognized and provide your name and address on the sign-on sheet. Please begin your remarks by stating your name for the benefit of the commissioners. All remarks are to be addressed to the Planning Commission, not to anyone else in the room. At this time, I ask that all cell phones, tablets, or any other devices that might disrupt this meeting, please either be placed in silent mode or be turned off. The roll call, Mr. Savanan.
Mr. Abahedian.
Here.
Ms. Cruz.
Here.
Mr. Evans.
Here.
Mr. Faison.
Here.
Mr. Hudson. Mr. Krent.
Here.
Ms. Koopa.
Here.
Mr. Sanzika.
Here.
Mr. Tagle.
Here.
Ms. Howe.
Here.
Quorum present. Item number 2 on the agenda, approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda, please? Mr. Faison, second by Mrs. Koopa. Roll call, please.
Ms. Cruz.
Yes.
Mr. Evans.
Yes.
Mr. Faison.
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Ms. Koopa.
Yes.
Mr. Sanzika.
Yes.
Mr. Tagle.
Yes.
Mr. Abahedian.
Yes. Item number 3, approval of the minutes for the August 8, 2017. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes, please? Mr. Edmonds, and a second, Mr. Sanzika. Roll call, please, Mr. Savana.
Mr. Evans.
Yes.
Mr. Faison.
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Ms. Koopa.
Yes.
Mr. Sanzika.
Yes.
Mr. Tagle.
Yes.
Mr. Abahedian.
Yes.
Ms. Cruz.
Yes.
Item number 4, public comment for items not on the agenda. No one in the audience to speak on any item that is not on the agenda. We'll move to item number 5, the ZBA report. Ms. Koopa.
We did not have a meeting. We were supposed to, and 3 of the members of the ZBA came, and in Mr. Evans' 13-year experience as a zoning board of appeals liaison and 9 years here in the city of Troy, he's never had this happen before. People didn't show up from the ZBA. We didn't have quorum.
A large agenda, too.
It was a big
We had 5 items on the agenda. 1 got dropped between the time that we got the agenda and the 4 items that were remaining. And I think that it had some impact on the people. And I don't want to speak about it because the ZBA needs to discuss it. But I believe that, you know, when we postpone a meeting, we don't address it when it comes to our docket. It affects those who are applying.
Sure.
So,
And what's somewhat frustrating is the laws in Michigan related to how much notification you have to provide. Scheduling a special meeting, there's really not that much advantage to it because you have to have at least 15 days notice, and with the timing of the publications, that it really doesn't save you much time with a special meeting. So you really puts everything off a month.
Brent, are there any requirements as either a commissioner or on the ZBA to notify someone that you're not, I mean, are there time constraints that you should let someone know that you won't be able to make a meeting?
There's nothing that I'm aware of, Mr. Monty, feel free to chime in. There's nothing in the rules that provide a timeline that I'm aware of, but I think our planning commission gets it. If someone's going on vacation, everyone gives us plenty of notice. And what's very helpful as administration for the ZBA, we have 2 alternates. So if you give us a warning, we can call up an alternate and say, can you attend? And we've got 2 that have really been pinch hit, but that didn't happen. So
I did that from the June meeting. I was away and I couldn't attend, and I let Mr. Evans know, and they had the substitute instead of the alternate step in.
Isn't there an actual open position?
Yes, there is. Yeah, there's one position open.
Well, maybe the mayor pro tem should be looking into filling that.
I believe we are.
Yeah.
Okay. Then we'll move on to item number 6, the DDA report. Mr. Sullivan.
There was no meeting, there's nothing to report.
Planning and zoning report. Item number 7.
We've got a long, you've probably seen our wall in the planning department. We painted it, and we've got all the projects on the wall. And we've got a number of projects that are in a holding pattern right now, where we're waiting for the applicant to make tweaks to get it back to us. 2 of note are Seasons 52 and Yard House, the 2 restaurants at 888 West Big Beaver. We're waiting on those. And this is a developer that we've worked with many times, and he's not shy to call us and kind of, I don't want to use the word pester, but I guess I just did. Pester us related to how soon we can go, how soon we can go. And now the worm has turned, and Ben and I are calling him up saying, when are you going to get us revised plans? Let's go.
So that project was supposed to be fast-tracked.
Exactly. Yeah. We've called him a number of times.
The parking deck,
Yeah.
Shake Shack was almost like unreal of how quick they said they would get that completed.
And if anyone, I know some of you work in the area, Shake Shack's going up quickly. It really is. And Fidelity looks like it's almost done.
Okay. Then we'll move on to item number 8, the main item for tonight on the agenda, the zoning ordinance text amendment, file number ZOTA 252, design standards. Mr. Carlisle.
Actually gonna,
Mr. Sutton.
I can start. So we were joking today, how when I say, we're gonna tag team, that's code for me saying, you do all the talking and I'll just sit here. So our goal today is for us to really tag team. So design, we talked the last 2 weeks ago, we talked about, we were reminded that the Planning Commission feels as a group that it's time to move forward with design standards of some type and start having that dialogue. If you remember, we talked about doing this a number of months ago, and what we decided was there's some low-hanging fruit, some items that were easier to address and to amend in the ordinance, such as the residential variation and the how to measure transparency along Big Beaver, and there's a number of items that we a number of provisions that we amended in the zoning ordinance, and that's done. So now we're looking at design requirements. So we're pretty well on track, and again we try to fast track this memo to get the conversation jump started, because we knew there was a possibility of having some time tonight to talk about this. This is something I don't believe this is something that we can really tackle as quickly as we did the other provisions, because depending on where we go with this, we could be directed by the Planning Commission to create an entire other body. We'll see how this goes, but we'll move as quickly as we can. But I think the goal here is to keep this moving so we can keep progressing. And we'll be able to come up with more accurate timelines once we know what the scope of the work is going to be, based on dialogue tonight and moving forward. So that was my introduction there.
it was great, keep going.
So this is much like the most recent fairly significant amendments that we worked on, the tree protection and the cluster ordinance. You start first with a meeting like this with discussion, set the table of where to go from here. So what we're going to talk about tonight are general design issues, the applicability, and what types of processes we'd like to think about entering into to address these concerns. So. Tag teaming, huh, Ben? So in terms of current requirements, in 2006, the city adopted the Big Beaver Corridor Study, and what that did was it created a vision for Big Beaver, and that, again, that's focusing on one corridor, but that was the first significant effort in my time here that the city engaged in, and that was a policy document, not law, but a policy document, but it did address vision, and it was that first step. We then developed design guidelines for the Downtown Development Authority areas along Big Beaver. And that was intended to guide development, to assist developers in explaining what we're trying to accomplish along Big Beaver. These were non-binding guidelines, so there's not a lot of teeth in those guidelines. But we took the Big Beaver corridor study as a policy. We rolled it into the master plan when we adopted that in 2008, and that was the vision in a master plan format that we then used when we implemented that. We implemented that vision in the Big Beaver form-based code in the zoning ordinance in 2011. So we have design standards in the zoning ordinance. Some of them are relatively general. Again, I mentioned the variation in residential, single-family residential, but form-based code, there's a lot of design standards in the form-based code. But based on what we've talked about with the Planning Commission, we're looking for more than what we have on the books. So I've talked about a few, tag team now, go back.
So, as you noted in our memo, we outlined, I think, 5 questions that we'd like to discuss with the Planning Commission. But before we get into the questions, we wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page about what the recent development we've seen and what the design is specifically what we're seeing. And most of these pictures are going to be along Big Beaver, but we went and took a bunch of pictures of recently approved and built developments in Troy. We're going to spend a little bit of time on each one. We're not going to spend too much time on each picture, but really, we want to get a sense from the Planning Commission, when you look at these, what do you like about them? What do you not like about them? What common themes are you seeing in these pictures? What is missing from these developments? And so just to kind of make sure that we're all on the same page and understanding kind of where we are from a development standpoint. So we'll just quickly kind of go through these ones. These all have been approved and built in the last, I'd say, 5 years at the longest.
And it's interesting when you see it all together. You tend to get the projects mixed up or forget about some of them. But when you see them all presented together, we've done approved a lot of cool developments over the last 5 years.
So these are the 2 hotels that are along 75, just north of the Carrabba's and Bonefish, the ones that kind of face interior to each other.
I look at those from my office every day. And Carrabba's and Bonefish.
These are the Carrabba's and the Bonefish, the 2 restaurants in front of those hotels. These are actually, again, front right on Big Beaver. This is the middle kind of retail section of that development. You kind of have the tower element of the Verizon in the middle with Jersey Mike's and NAF. Is it NAF?
Yeah.
On the 2 ends there. There's no functional second story here. Those are just a faux second story.
And what's interesting about this picture is where the public realm meets the private realm is somewhere in here. We're not quite sure. But for the pedestrian who's out there, it really doesn't matter.
Granite City, this is the first building built in form-based district.
And it's a cool juxtaposition of the new filling in the parking lot, and then the massive building set back very, very far from the road in the background. I think it's really cool. I'm guessing your office is up there somewhere we can see it.
Do you see the 2 side towers or the 2 side gray stripes?
Mhm.
I'm the second gray strip, about halfway up. I'm on the 15th floor.
I can see it. I can see you there in your desk.
You're looking at the Bonefish and the Carrabba's.
And I look down on Granite City and I can see Starbucks and yeah.
Starbucks, this was the last significant project I think built before the change in the zoning ordinance. This kind of kick-started the new change to the zoning ordinance in terms of the form-based code. This has many or most of all the elements of the form-based district. This would comply today with the form-based code. This is the Eddie V's that was recently approved and very recently constructed and opened. If you'll note, I just want to note that that top line is all EFS, and we had raised that with the applicant. They didn't make those changes there. And also the large circular vehicular drop-off area that kind of dominates the front feature. Moving a little farther down Big Beaver, this is the planned unit development, so we call it the Jonah PUD, or Big Beaver PUD. It was the first development really to come out of the recession that we had dealt with. And again, a mixed retail development. You've got the bank on the corner, and then you've got some mixed retail kind of fronting on Big Beaver.
Most of the elements in our form-based district are here. They don't do a very good job of meeting the transparency requirements. They like to cover the windows. It's getting better, but they still have a ways to go.
And again, you'll see kind of a faux second story, faux height element onto the front there too.
Yeah.
Across the street is another kind of mixed retail development. You've got the Lazy Boy, and then next to you've got the Sprint store. We had some issues with transparency on this building as well, as you can see. And again, half of it or a quarter of it is actually below the grade, so there's a big elevation change on this one. I think this goes without saying what this is.
It's got my Volkswagen van there on the site. I like that. One of my favorite buildings in the city. Every time I see this building, it puts a smile on my face, especially at night. Not an architect, but I love the way they have different colored glass. It looks spectacular at night.
This is the Sedona tap that was, again, recently approved and opened. They've done a really nice job of screening the outdoor seating, but also making that a part element of the front facade. And then you can tell the rooftop deck that Mr. Edmonds plans on visiting tonight.
Hopefully with many of you.
Note that this has not been open that long. There's already 2 dead arborvitae. We're going to
I was just going to say, landscape.
have a conversation with Marty on this pretty soon.
You'll notice also the signage is really subtle on this one.
It
The
is.
signage is not out in your face too, which I thought was very interesting too.
And another trade-off, I know the planning commission and staff, quite frankly, want to see more vertical mixed use and more verticality and additional stories. But having that rooftop dining, it's a nice compromise. I mean, we're not getting the massing and the height that we really want, but the activity on the roof, I think, is a pretty cool element.
It is.
This is the MGR, obviously the MGR Theater. This is the largest building that's been built in any form-based district. Again, form-based is not intended to have these large, big, I would call them almost big block, but bigger developments such as this. We tried our best and worked as hard as we could with the applicant to get some form-based elements into it, and I think they've done an okay job with it.
They grudgingly provided the elements. This was a very challenging site. Massive, you're all aware, it was a decrepit Kmart building. And the form-based district, we got the relationship on Livernois that we wanted. It could be better, but we really did our best to get there.
I think this is the only building actually built in the Maple Road form-based district as well, to date, if I remember correctly.
No, the K9 club that we drove by today, which is coming along great, by the way, if anyone's seen it.
This is the Stone Crest Senior Assisted Living PUD. Just finished up, and I think it actually looks really nice. This is the front elevation that fronts onto Livernois. You can see.
I love everything about that except for the chain link fence. I
All
don't-
for the dog park?
Yeah, or just around the parking. There's a chain link fence, and that, you know.
The detention basin has a chain link fence,
Yes.
and
Did we approve that?
I talked to Kurt about that, and I think that's going to be modified in the spring.
Good.
This is Walsh College. This was approved a few years ago. Basically, they put a new front onto the front of the existing building. The front's here on the window as well. This is the Kilmer PUD. This was done, Brent, was this done probably during this time of the adoption of the form-based code, or right?
A little bit before,
Okay.
little known fact, Ben and I eat at Saitai every second Tuesday at about 5 o'clock if anyone wants to meet us there.
Again, mixed retail. They've got this nice pedestrian spine in the middle, and then that backs up to a bunch of townhomes that are actually behind it as well. And this is an example where they actually do have 2 rows of parking in front of the building itself.
They've done the outside space between the buildings is really effective. If anyone Hasn't
I just
been
ate there, outside, sat outside,
Yeah.
between DeBella's and Sai Tai.
Yep. And did you notice the stainless steel trees
I did.
with the fountain, with
did,
the
I
little
did.
fountain? It's
Water
really,
feature onto it, yeah.
it's really cool. The water feature provides a little bit of sound. There's art in there that one of the developers' brothers painted. It's got a really cool feel in there. They did a nice job.
It looks like the townhomes are all occupied.
They are.
That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, my husband and I looked at him, they're like, oh my gosh, why do you want to live right on top of a parking lot?
Mhm.
And my daughter Emma looked at him and she's like, I could walk to everything.
Yes. A
I mean, she's
different-
like, I would totally live there.
Different perspective.
Look at all the things I can walk to. Mhm.
This is the same development, this is the retail portion of that. A little bit different elements, you see the corner elements in between the pedestrian, they've got stone, and in the middle they have more of a metallic kind of look to them. Basically, right next door, basically a block away down Big Beaver is this is where the Tom and Chi and the Cycle Bar, and there's two more restaurants in this. Single story with a faux kind of second story height element to it.
That's a new Qdoba also, right?
Yes.
We'll get to that, yeah, yep. And that's the Qdoba right next door to it, which is unique to Big Beaver. I don't think we have anything that really looks like this on Big Beaver.
Right.
It certainly adds a splash of color.
Yep.
This is a gas station built under the neighborhood node form-based code when we first told Kroger they had to meet the form-based code, they had a hard time wrapping their hands around what they had to do, but this meets the intent of the code with the building closer to the street and the gas pumps behind,
It's at Rochester and
just south of Long Lake.
Long Lake,
Crooks and Waddles, this is 7-Eleven. Again, the 7-Eleven meeting the form-based code. You see they've got the kind of the corner element for access for the pedestrian with the windows looking in. We have to fight with them constantly to not put signage in their windows and cover their windows up. But I mean, for a 7-Eleven building, it's a pretty nice looking
yeah. Not
building.
bad.
The office to the south is coming along too. If they haven't started putting landscaping in yet, they're starting really soon, so it's gonna start looking really good.
This is building right on, is this on Livernois?
No, this is
No, it's
on
on Crooks and Maple
Crooks and
Lawn.
Maple Lawn, yes.
Yeah.
I
This
highly
actually,
recommend Lesage. If you've not
It's
been
a
there,
great
you have to
Mediterranean-
go. It's
great Mediterranean,
outstanding.
yeah.
Mediterranean, Lebanese food.
this actually does have a functional second story on it.
So the mixed use we're not seeing on Big Beaver, this guy's done this one and
He's doing the one right
the
next door,
door.
too.
Could be very similar too, right?
Yeah, and we just recently approved one, Eaton Plaza, to the south of this, of Lock.
Did we approve the one next door?
Yes.
What, I don't remember what it was gonna be.
It's gonna look like this.
It's like a sister building.
Office
almost.
on the second floor.
Plus
Yep.
garage for
Yeah,
some kind of classic cars, maybe.
Yeah.
so we'll have three relatively new vertical, two-story mixed-use buildings on Crooks. So it does happen in Troy, as much as we're told by developers it doesn't.
Field and Stream.
Big box retail. So what are overall thoughts about, just without getting into a lot of detail, what are your thoughts when you see these
Where
projects?
was the Amber project on that?
We're waiting for that to finish.
Not
This is
done.
only completed
Not
projects.
Not done yet. 2 years later.
Two.
Is it 2 years
No,
later?
I've been on the planning commission 3 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was one of the first
Was
ones.
Meehe's in the neighborhood node by the Kroger gas station?
The reason we actually took some of those pictures today, the reason we didn't take the picture of Nehe's is the planning commission didn't approve that. That was
Administrative?
administrative.
Okay.
So just real quick, off the top, what were any initial comments on what you've seen so far? Good, bad? Common themes you saw?
I have all kinds of things I can say. Okay, so with respect to the Big Beaver corridor and bringing some of these, I'm just gonna call them fancier strip plazas closer in to the sidewalk and the road, I think we're done, really, with that look. I suppose you could continue it on down to DeQuinder, right? And past John R., but I think that that's the only direction that we could head if we were going to put more in there. While they're not true two-story buildings, having that additional height, that faux second story, does help add interest, and it does help break up the roof line, if you will, which makes them look more like they're independently standing as opposed to just, you know, a uniform strip plaza and there's just a different sign over each of the doorways. I did really like the Verizon public art. I mean, I think that we need to continue to encourage the public art. I love the outdoor seating, outdoor benches, the landscaping, the things that sort of want to make people hang out outside and not be in the restaurant or the retail store or whatever, but it sort of brings people outside. I liked. All of the buildings that you showed tonight were actually pretty good projects, right? I mean, I can't really say I looked at any of them and went, oh, golly, that's just awful. But we're here tonight to talk about, in my mind, those projects that are coming to us, that we look at and we go, oh, golly, that's really awful. And we don't have any reason or way to say no, or right? So
we didn't take any, I don't think there are any residential projects in there. What commercial projects are you thinking of that were awful that you didn't have?
Well, how about this child care center?
Yeah, that was one.
That we just approved, right? I mean, that was one that lacked architectural creativity, for sure. It was one where, you know, do you really want to use those windows, or would you like to use different windows? And do you want to use that material? I mean, everything about it was just not good. Not good. I know that as I've been sort of thinking about this, you know, I know that the things that we talked about were flexibility, being able to have flexibility with whatever it is that we do. So I hope that we keep that in mind tonight as we try and figure out what path that we want to take. I'm going to encourage that we try and take a flexible path. I don't want to be too boxed in. I'm not crazy about the look of the MJR Theater. Out of all the things that you showed, that was probably my least favorite project. But I don't have enough architectural experience to be able to tell you, you know, how you make a humongous, ginormous movie theater look better than that. I'm still all about the old movie theater that has the marquee in front. I mean, I still like that kind of vintage vibe when you go to the movie. But that's just me.
One of the other things I really liked was the pedestrian scale lighting. I think that's really critical if you want to bring folks to walk
And I would be willing to forego the second story in some instances for the rooftop situation that Sedona brought to the table. And I know that, I mean, you go to New York City or go to Birmingham. They've got buildings that are taller than one story that have rooftop access. I mean, you can put a rooftop access on any size building, but you know, that might be one area where we would be willing to have some flexibility. If you're going to have an open rooftop situation, that might be a way that you wouldn't have to add the second story.
One thing that kind of what I noticed is, with the exception of the hospital and maybe one other projects, there was this consistency of this neutral element. The colors were neutral. It was the stone, the brick. So everything was more of even though some of the projects had a modern look to them, they were fairly neutral. So in my mind, I was thinking of, you know, the discussion or the question is that we had last time, are we looking for projects to blend in more with the neighborhood? Or is it what we really like about the hospital is that it doesn't blend in? Is that one of the things that really makes it stand out? And it's almost become a landmark for the city. And so the question is, yes, all those projects are really cool looking, they all have a unique identity, but the hospital has, it's in a class of its own. Are we really striving for more of these landmark projects, or are we gonna settle for everything kind of being a little bit unique, but for the most part, blending in?
I think that we can have some consistency with the neutrality, the earth tone elements, the stones, the bricks, the glass, the things of that nature. And you can always put interesting architectural features that create your pop of color or your steel. Almost like when you, I can't use a sports analogy, I'm so sorry, but I can talk about how you might take a living room and put neutral paint on the walls and a coordinating neutral fabric on your sofa, and then pop your colors with your toss pillows, pop your colors with the art that you're hanging on the wall. I mean, so sort of that same concept. But if you go into downtown Detroit and you look at the Heidelberg project, which is a mass of all kinds of things thrown together, and then you go into Birmingham and you see the consistency of the neutral buildings and the architectural details. To me, there's no comparison. I mean, I think that you want uniqueness, but you also need that consistency to create an overall landscape that becomes visually appealing.
To maybe focus the conversation on something different than, I don't want to undermine the creativity of the professionals that bring their projects to the table. One of the things that I think is highly important is the setting, the surroundings, number one, of where is the project.
Right.
I think of the church expansion off of John R.
Right.
They didn't consider their setting. They didn't consider their surroundings.
Right.
The other thing that I think is really important for us as commissioners, so as we're not leading the design, the professional has to come and tell us the foundation of why they're doing what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And does that make sense in the context of what they're doing and where they're doing it?
Mm-hmm.
Now, take, for example, the DMC hospital building. That client wanted something that was really going to make a statement for them. Now, do we want all buildings to do that? Probably not. But I think if the team that comes before us can give us some rational foundation and logical path for how they got to what they are presenting to us, more power to them. The problem I'm having with not so many of the some of them up there, MGR, I think they missed a huge opportunity with that building. Personally, I think it's disastrous looking. And it's not because of the scale, but it's because of colors and the materials they selected. But be that as it may, I think that the folks that come before us need to show us and tell us, why are we seeing what we're seeing? Give us some good foundation, good design principles. Why does it fit in this neighborhood or on this street or in the massing and the materials that you want to use? Why? Tell us why that is the best choice.
We almost, I like the direction, Mr. Tagle. We almost need to script them, provide them with a script and with questions, so that their architect can come prepared to answer these questions. Maybe there's a half a dozen to 10 questions where they've got to make a presentation and impress upon us why they went down this path, so that we're on the same page.
It will separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. Because guys are going to come before us and aren't going to be able to articulate why they're doing or proposing to do what they have in front of us.
Or they're going to say, this is our product, this is our corporate product. And I think we got to really press them on that, because I think we need quality projects in Troy. And I think just because they say, well, this is what we've done in Novi, or this is what we've done, we'd like to have something a little more distinctive for Troy.
Well, Don, that's an interesting scenario, because there are organizations, companies that are branded. And because XYZ company in Novi has a brand and they want that brand to be replicated in Troy,
Right.
I don't know that we're here to say, no, you can't replicate your brand. I mean, that's pretty foundational to the success of that organization.
Okay.
But I think we need to be willing to listen to why is that brand fit in where you want it to fit in, as opposed to a little oil and water. I mean, you know, you have a great brand, but it's not working here. You know, tell us why it works here, or it doesn't. I mean, they're not going to tell us why it doesn't work here. That's up to us.
Right.
Did any of you have an opportunity to look at the links that I don't know, Ben, or it was in your?
Yes.
If you looked at, and if you read the Ann Arbor Design Board, what they're asking their petitioners to come forward and talk about, that's exactly all I'm saying. Come to us with a solid story to tell us. How did you go from a clean piece of paper to this design concept you want us to approve? And give us some good foundational reasons why we should approve it.
And I would say that if we had that kind of set of questions, or we wanted them to paint that story, then the child care center would not have met our standard, because it was almost like a cookie cutter of their other venues.
But then what if they said, well, but this is our brand, this is what
But
our other
does it
stores
fit?
look like?
Their other stores are in rural Michigan. This is Troy. This isn't rural Michigan.
Right.
Right. I don't disagree with the questionnaire, the list of questions that you want them to be able to justify or explain with their presentation. I still think that, you know, you can rationalize anything, and at the end of the day, we still need to be able to make positive or negative comments based on our benchmark and our experience being residents of Troy. You know, living here, driving around town, knowing what the total picture looks like, conversations we have with our friends and our neighbors, things that people have opinions about, you know, all of that just sort of comes into play. It's not just about how did you answer these questions, and if they're good enough, if you answered those to our satisfaction, well then go ahead and build it. I mean, it's not, you don't stop with that.
I don't know if I totally agree with that.
That's fine.
I think there are a number of us on this commission that have a hard time saying no. We don't have any criteria to say, no, you haven't met this bar, whatever we decide that bar is.
Isn't that our objective?
Well, I would hope. I hope it is. I hope it is to say, we've talked about raising the quality of the product, the building product we see in this community.
So John, does the questions create the bar? I mean, I think the questions give you information, right, and perspective, but does it create the bar that you're looking for, or that we're looking for collectively?
Well,
Because I can see us getting all the answers and still maybe going down the same path and proving things that
But
maybe
you
people
wouldn't-
view as suboptimal.
I don't know that I don't know.
I don't know either.
I think the questions are designed for them to tell you why this is the best they can do in this community, in this location, with the client they're working with.
But what if we still listen to it and go, yeah, no.
That's okay.
No,
That's
I don't think
okay,
so.
because,
I don't think so.
because even if the gentleman from last meeting with the daycare, I'm sorry, I heard this was your brand, I've heard you've done this all over the state, but it doesn't fit here, in my opinion. And it doesn't fit because, you know, after the meeting, we talked a little bit about this. This isn't the context of where all of your other developments have been placed. So think about it differently.
So when you say some of us have a hard time saying no, are you suggesting that if someone comes in front of the planning commission, has completed the questionnaire, goes through the presentation process, and then we still look at it and go, not sold, that we should be able to say, gee, thanks, but no thanks?
No, what I'm saying is right now, we have a hard time saying no, because what are we saying no? I mean, we don't know. Okay, somebody comes in here and they go down the checklist of the zoning ordinance requirements, and they've done their plans and everything fits. How do you say no? I've heard everybody around the table says, how can we say no to this? The attorney says,
Well,
we're going to
I'd
open
like to
ourselves
say-
up for a lawsuit.
Right, I'd like to say we use the public health, safety, and welfare argument, but, you know.
That only goes
That's a
so
whole
far.
separate discussion.
I think it's only fair, so we asked for color renderings, we asked for material samples and color swaths, and so far, the community's been pretty responsive. I think
And
it's
C
only,
plus.
well, you know,
3D, remember we wanted 3D represented.
yeah,
Heck, yeah, we did.
but we're going down that path. But I think the questions frame the discussion, and the questions provide background to why do we get to where we are here with the color renderings? Why do you choose this palette?
That's exactly.
You know, it's almost like we've got some pieces of the puzzle, but we're missing the background to the puzzle pieces.
And that's it, you've got to, I really go along with what John's saying, but it's also, what questions do we ask? So, you take a couple buildings like the PNC or Walsh College, we're asking, does this look like art? Are you creating something sculptural in our city? Something that's stunning, that would be a landmark in other cities of our type or better? Those are, again, it gets back to what questions we actually ask in those questions, and but the heart of it is what John said, have a questionnaire. Do they meet these, how do they answer these questions?
But to Carlton's point, I'm not sure that answering the questions creates the bar.
Right. That's
Well,
my
it's-
It's
concern.
the questions you ask.
I have
Give
to-
me an example of a
Okay.
question that I could ask, or a series of questions that creates a design standard bar.
Okay.
Because
Does-
I'm
and
struggling
again,
with
the
that.
question is, does your building look like a piece of art?
To whom? What kind of art?
Well,
Modern
that's our
art?
commit, that's what this body.
Renaissance art? I mean,
No, it could be, but there are buildings that are definitely standards in art and sculpture, and there are buildings that definitely aren't. And I think we can determine that, if they meet that question or not.
I think what's really important for us is to try to remove our personal tastes from, is this a good architectural project or not? And that's really hard, because I don't like that color, I don't like the color, I don't like the shape, whatever it is. But if the presenter can tell us how they got to where they got, have you ever looked at something and said, and listened, and it's, okay, I can see, I can kind of buy into that, I can get it. Maybe that's not my style or that, I wouldn't.
I have
wouldn't-
voted for those projects.
Okay, that's all I'm talking about. That's all I'm saying, is that we have to give, or actually require the petitioner to tell us the how and the why they got to where they got. And try to remove ourselves from, I really would have used a different color on that stucco, or transparent glass as opposed to a tinted glass, or whatever. I find, I'm really challenged when I look at a lot of these buildings, because I'll sit here and say, like I said a minute ago to MJR, I think they missed some opportunities where that could have been a very inviting building. To me, that is not an inviting building at all. I'll go there if I want to watch a movie, but I'm not going there because what a cool space, what a cool building.
But with some of the things that were outlined in our packet, the question number 2, like what design or architectural elements should design regulations address? There are some things in here that I think are noteworthy and wouldn't necessarily be flushed out in questions, like four-sided architecture.
Oh, I totally disagree with that. How
Or
often do we see the front and the side of a building, but when you get to the back of the building, it's garbage. It's the back of the building, who cares? Now, it's becoming more important when we're pushing the buildings up to the street, because
Right.
now four sides are important.
Right, but it seems to me that is something that maybe lends itself, or the loading areas and trash enclosures, or things of that, those sort of lend themselves to having some legal language, ordinance-style language around it.
Can I get back to question 1 first before we move to question 2?
If you must.
I'm hearing a lot of discussion about context and et cetera, but what are we trying to address here? I mean, what tangible things can you give us to tell us to go back to look at that we're trying to address? I mean,
I think maybe to answer that is, answer that with a question. Are we addressing quality? I think we've seen quality, right? So maybe quality of materials, we've seen that presented here. Maybe we're addressing or we're asking questions more of how much better can this architecture get? Like, maybe that's a question we should be asking. How, on a scale of 1 to 100, what have we seen in the last 5 years in terms of where we think the architecture is in terms of quality of design? Is it 70, 75? I mean, we're trying to push it to 100. We're probably not going to get to 100. That's in a perfect world. But
Yeah.
where are we now? Where do we think as a body we are now in terms of quality of
Okay, so-
the design?
Right, I guess my question is, when you say quality, what about quality? Is it material quality that's lacking? I mean, there's a lot of ways to define quality. I'm trying to find ways to more
I thought
tangible ways to
question
define.
two
Creativity.
answered question one.
So maybe my question is the quality of the creativity of the actual project. Is it just maybe a creativity, generic creativity? Like we've seen, for example, that assisted living on Livernois. That came through about 2 or 3 iterations before they came through the final design. So if we would have settled for that first submittal they had, that would have been at maybe 25% creativity of what they actually brought before us as a final product. So maybe that's a question. What's the quality of the creativity? Now that can be somewhat subjective. Again, we're going down the path of subjectivity and artistic preferences of the designer, of the design professional, and of the audience or the general public or the residents.
Now you're getting to the root of the matter. We've had professionals up here that I am 100% confident the project they're going to present is a winner. And there's just the opposite on other professionals that have come up here. And that's part of the issue that we have to deal with. Because we're accepting projects from those professionals, for whatever reason, don't hit the home run. And my point is, you know, I'm up against this every day when I go into a client and say, here's the design I want you to accept. And I have to tell them why it's going to benefit his company or whatever it is. Same scenario. When we invite, or when a petitioner comes in front of us, their responsibility is to sell this commission as to why this project is great for Troy. Why does it fit in the site that they're buying or bought? Why does it fit with the context of the streetscape that they're in? What are the amenities? And we need to maybe understand that a little bit more of why did you design it this way? And that's going to get into a little bit more of, we're done just looking at the facades and do we like the shape of the window or the material they put on the facades, but why? They have to, that's architect, you know, architecture isn't just about the skin of a building. Architecture is the entire building, the three-dimensional interior and exterior spaces. You know, I laugh when people say, well, we'll get somebody to design the inside, we'll get somebody to design the outside. It's one building. You know, it's got to work together. There's got to be reasons why you're going to put a window where you're going to put it, both from the outside and from the inside, or lands, whatever. So I guess my point is I'm trying to go back to, we have to make sure we get and understand why they feel this is the best project they can present to us and get our approval. And I don't know that some of the petitioners are going to be qualified or are going to be successful, maybe that's a better word, to successful at doing that.
And then what do? Approve it?
If it does not sell you on the criteria, no.
And then deny it based on
What
what?
we're
If it's
talking about.
Right, but if it's variance-free,
Wait a
right?
minute, no, not if we have design standards. That's the whole objective here. We don't have anything right now where we can say no. It doesn't meet the standard.
So this is the beginning of a conversation we're having. And the assumption is that we're going to consider strengthening our design standards. So in addition to these questions that are going to help frame the dialogue that are going to spoon feed the architects. The architect, he or she can come here prepared to make a presentation to the Planning Commission address these questions so that there's dialogue and we know why the building is where it is. We're also going to consider updating or developing design standards to go along with that. So we're going to have more tools in our toolbox as a planning commission.
One of the aspects that, just to kind of follow up to one of the items you mentioned, John, is location, the location of the project. I think as we approach this, and we tackle this from different angles, in my mind, a project on Big Beaver is not the same thing as a project on Rochester Road.
No, it's not.
So if an architect comes to us, if a developer comes to us and says, I want to put this project on Rochester Road, that project might not be the right project for Big Beaver and vice versa. Where if a developer comes and says, the main reason I'm putting this project on Big Beaver is because I wanted to add to everything else that is on Big Beaver in terms of walkability. I want to increase that massing, that density, and 5 years and 10 years down the road, this is the vision for Big Beaver's walkability. That project, in terms of the actual scope of walkability being a priority, that might not fit on Rochester Road. So again, I think the standards that we apply to these projects, there has to be some kind of flexibility, where it can't be too rigid to say, you know, it doesn't matter
not
where.
one standard for the
you
whole city.
can't, right, like it
Sorry, I
can't
didn't
be.
mean to interrupt.
No.
Yeah.
So
But if the standard was, tell us how you fit in the context of this site.
then.
Does that
Right.
matter if it's Rochester, or Big
Right.
Beaver, or John R., or Maple? No, it doesn't.
Right.
You have to, now, you know, there's a little slippery slope there, because if you go pick a spot on Maple where you've got these 1950 industrial buildings, you know, I mean, what's the context that we're working within? So we may need to look at that a little bit differently, as opposed to another development on Big Beaver next to some of the newer developments we have. So I mean, there are some, I agree, there has to be some flexibility in that, but the root question is context. What are you doing in this neighborhood to improve this neighborhood?
Mr. Adams?
Yeah, go ahead, it's
So
open
I have
discussion.
a really simple one. You said, what are you trying to accomplish with this? So we've gotten a couple of developers have come in with some plans for us that we know are not good. There's one in particular, Stonecrest is great, but there was another facility that came in. I wanted to say no, but we didn't have an ordinance that helped me say no. It looks so institutional, and it always reminds me of what Ms. Cruz says, what's the ordinance for ugly?
Prison.
Oh, yeah, I quit using that word.
But yeah, I mean, that was the way that facility looked. So I want something that's going to give me an ordinance that will prevent me from approving something that doesn't fit within our city. And I don't know how to explain that.
I think the challenge with that project was, kind of in context of this conversation, is they were actually trying to fit in with the industrial area that they were going in. So we were actually trying to push them away from that look, and they were trying to stay within that look. So again, that's the challenge. Mr. Tagle was saying, maybe if they are in the industrial zone, maybe maybe the criteria should be not necessarily, the challenge is not necessarily to stick to that look, but kind of think outside the box and get out of that look, because eventually maybe that whole corridor, we wanted to look different.
Because what they did and ended up proposing was something similar to Shelby Township.
Right.
And we all thought it looked much better than the other one. So I'm wondering if this could be, should we require more than one site plan or more than one building facade? So we at least, or is that a reasonable request?
I would, before the architect speaks, I mean,
You don't pay us enough to do that.
you're hiring a professional
Yes.
to address the programming and the design materials, the colors, and all these different elements, and
Right.
and to expect he or she to do the two designs, and then put it on the planning commission to choose. The role of the planning commission is not to choose a design. That's not our
Just a
role.
critique of-
Our role is to review site plan applications, and you hire an architect with a registered architect for their professionalism, and you hope that they're capable of putting together a good design.
Just a follow-up question on that, so I kind of agree with Mr. Tate, because I hear him ask the similar questions when the plans come before us. There are some developers, some architects kind of take that to heart. They think about the comments they hear around the table, and they come back, right, with something different, something improved, at least from our perspective. There's some that say, this is my plan. I can't do anything else. And it's not for us to direct them to do something else specific, right? So how do you deal with that situation?
Well, I
Is
think,
Go ahead, I'll let you answer.
well, the situation that Ms. Kupo was referred to, the planning commission actually postponed that item, gave them some, I think, some pretty good direction, and they came back with a significantly improved product. Was it perfect? No, but it was dramatically better than what we first saw. But I think that's the intent of what we're discussing today is where we are now and where do you want to go as a planning commissioner with respect to design. I mean, I kind of inferred that we were going to be bolstering our design standards. That's for us to decide whether we're going to do that or not. If this conversation lets us get into question number 2 at some point this evening, maybe we'll be closer to
Which
answer.
answers question number 1.
Yeah, but
And to your point, I feel like we have to bolster the design standards to be effective.
that's what
Yeah.
I'm hearing.
Right.
But I personally, I really like the idea of the questions, because I think the questions lead to framing the discussion with the planning commission.
Well, I think they work in concert,
Yeah.
right? I think you said that earlier.
It's a good first step.
Yeah.
Those questions will also really help you in the meetings with the developer too.
They will,
Like a
and
checklist.
we'll get them, I think what we do is we give them, obviously, they'd get it with the application. They would submit they'd submit a response to those questions.
Right.
So we'd have the questions in advance, and then we'd ask them to summarize these questions, present them with the project. So I think that's going to be a big help right out of the gate. So,
How soon can you start implementing that?
Next.
what time is it now? Like I said, it's a process, and our goal is to keep moving this forward. So we would, do I hear consensus that the questions are a good idea?
Yes.
Excellent idea. Okay,
Yes.
we'll move on.
And I think this has to be looked at in a bigger scale, in the sense that I don't want us just to publish an outline of questions, and when a petitioner comes up, fill these out. I think we need to engage the development community and say, look, we're making some changes here in Troy. These are kind of the new rules we're going to play by, so they're aware of it. Because they're going to push back, some are going to push back. And I think the more we can try to reach out and explain why we're doing what we're doing, maybe we'll win a few more than we'll lose, in that sense. So I think it's a bigger rollout or presentation, other than coming up with a sheet of paper at the counter saying, this is now part of we have design standards and you have to come forward with this information.
And that's, Mr. Taylor, that's not unusual for that to happen. That's typically where that happens with Brett and I when we have our upfront meetings with the development community before they even submit is, we'll have a discussion with them at that point. This is what's changed. And it was no different when the form-based code was adopted. We had to explain those differences then too, so.
I would almost question too, would a kind of a letter going out to the developers we've worked with, not giving them a lot of information, but kind of putting something out there and say, if you'd like to come in and talk to us about, the new whatever,
Scope. Yeah.
I just think we should try to be proactive. This isn't about making this bad for them. This is about raising the bar in this community, and in turn, raising their bar. And some people will understand that and go along with it, some will resist it.
At the end of the day, we all want the same thing.
Right.
We want a successful project.
Right.
that's going to add to what Troy is. That's what we all want, including the developer. So I agree with you. I think, and maybe we need to look at this rollout a little bit differently. Take advantage of social media, for example, maybe, or the letter, I think, is a good idea. Every architect and engineer and developer, we send them a letter and we explain it. And we're not trying to surprise anybody or
Right.
punish anybody, or it's not a negative. It's very much
It's
positive.
helping them be prepared.
I would be willing to take additional time and go to a room at the community center where we did a PowerPoint presentation and invite them to come and to meet the planning commissioners and to have conversation with us on an informal basis about what it is we're trying to accomplish. I would take an evening and do that.
I just want to have one question, if you can clarify before we move forward. Is the goal here to set up these standards to exempt residential or to include residential on this? I mean, what are we shooting for?
That's a question coming up.
Okay.
You're jumping ahead. We're not even through question 2.
Fine questions.
Okay.
So we started talking about this, but I'd like to hear more discussion and what we really intend to focus. And you could tell us it should be all of this, or it should only be part of these. And the first, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or so really talk about the building itself, and the last 5 really are site elements.
Right.
And I think a lot of those are, we kind of address a lot of those already, landscape standards and lighting standards, et cetera. But, for example, trash has been a big issue lately.
Well, the dumpster diva does like nice looking trash.
So really, what elements should we be focusing on as part of these either standards, guidelines, whatever we're going to go down the road of doing?
Well, with trash, I think it should be as unobtrusive as possible. Like, trash should never be the focal point. It should never be what you notice when you pull up to, say,
And the gates
Ruth's
should always
Chris.
be closed.
And the other end of that is the architectural creativity and variety. That should be the first thing you notice.
Right.
Oh my gosh, this is really stunning.
Mhm.
Can I suggest all of those elements, with maybe the exception of the trash person? Support number 1.
I would suggest though we add signs. That's been one of my pet peeves for a long time, and it's really not on the list. And it should be a major element of any site plan. And I know it's a sensitive issue in the city of Detroit, but it really is a very important design element.
Except that how many signs are so obnoxious already that we couldn't possibly stand them. I don't think, we fought this battle before, those of us have been on here a lot longer. This is more of an administrative function, so.
It doesn't have to be.
No, it can be an art
I
function.
understand. it
And,
doesn't-
the technology's changed
Do
so
you want to
much.
really push that political button?
I think it's important.
I don't think it's that political. I think
Oh,
it
it
has,
is, it is.
well, I think it has to do with the same thing as a building design, creativity, and how, can you first read the sign? That's important. Second is how well does it work, again, with John was saying, in the community, in the neighborhood, with the building, using similar materials so that it identifies that sign with the building. All those elements, I think, are critical as part of an overall design project. I agree, we got to include signs.
I think if we go down the path, if we take the path of actually doing a questionnaire for a developer, I think every single one of these can be incorporated into those questions somehow. The architect can justify, is this your limit of your creativity on this project? Can you explain building massing? Can you do more? Why did you do less? Can you explain your landscaping? Why only this much? Why not more? So I think all these elements, plus maybe even others, can be incorporated into those questions. And then the answers we get back will cover, or can cover, just about everything here.
So, I agree, and I understand what you're saying there. I guess part of this also is how specific do you want the language or wherever road we're going down to be? For example, do you want to dictate you can only use this material or only use that material? Do you want to require, what I say foresight architecture means every elevation has to have the same quality as the front elevation? That's kind of where I'm thinking, is there any hot buttons that you really want us to focus on and get very specific in these, rather than just address these in whole?
I don't want EPIS to be the primary material. I know
Well,
that.
Here, just like we have special
Okay.
use, this committee or this commission will vote on a special use for a zone. We could have a special use for specific materials, like corrugated steel, or cinder block, or EPIS. In other words, it would be a review to see those particular types of basic, real base materials. Base meaning not architecturally attractive. It would be part of a special use to use those materials.
I think in order to be able to specify a material to not be the dominant material, we actually have to get very specific into quantities, into percentages. That's the only way you can indicate to a developer, EIFS shall be limited to this percentage of your project facades. Because if it's not that specific, then the developer will actually set their own standards of how much of a certain material. So again, back to your question, how specific do we want to get? Do we?
Well, let me ask this
The
question.
material.
Are there EPIS projects in Troy that you're really happy with right now, are the ones that they showed us?
Well, one project that's dominantly EIFS is MJR, right? And if I'm not mistaken, that's predominantly EIFS, and I think that's not one of the landmark projects of Troy. But again, if it's a material that is not the predominant material, do we quantify it?
Let me ask John that question. Do you know of projects that have used EPIS in a very creative way?
Yes, and if I can lead into my response with that question is, unless we have a problem that we know a material is deficient, that it's not a good material, for whatever reason, like in a year it's gonna look like, it needs a costuming. It's the creativity of how the designer uses the material. It's not so much the material. I mean, you could list all kinds of building materials here. And I can show you all kinds of projects all over this country that people have come up with creative solutions with those materials. That I think, personally, I think, wow, I had not thought about that. You did a nice job with that.
Including concrete, right?
Including concrete, or concrete block, or steel, or rusted steel, or metal panels, there's all kinds of things. One of the things that our profession is challenged with is we have to respond to an owner's budget. And not every owner's budget will be able to afford maybe the higher end materials. So we have to be creative, also thinking about longevity and maintenance and all of that. So I don't necessarily want to attack the material per se, but I want to make sure that if EIFS is the material, it's done in a way that's a creative way, or that it's done that it's not. Unfortunately, a lot of times, what you associate EIFS with is a developer that hires an architect to I just need this building up, don't worry about the design,
Yeah.
make it simple, make it cheap, make it whatever. And that's a lot of times what we associate with, as opposed to, what's the one that's going up next to Fidelli? The
Shake Shack.
Shake Shack. I think, they've done some things with EIFS that are going to be fairly attractive. Now, it's a personal opinion. I know that there are others on this commission that may not agree with me. But I don't think it's the material that we need to focus on. I think it's how the material is applied and used on a project.
Thank you. That's helpful.
So we're talking about a specific building material, and we'll get there as these design standards evolve, but what I'm hearing obviously is that architectural creativity, variety of design, material use, go down the list.
Right.
These are all important.
Mm-hmm.
They all reflect back to the first item, the creativity. The materials you use, how you use them, the character, this building mass, and all of that gets into that first item. The architectural creativity. And even variety in design, I'm not quite sure what that means, but just, how have you taken an owner's program and an owner's budget in the context of where this building is going to be built, and how have you been creative to solve that problem? And that's all I think our goal here would be to have them tell us that. Tell us the story. Tell us, because so many petitioners come up well, Ben and Brent, you did a great presentation, I'm here to answer any questions, yeah. Well, how did you arrive at what you're showing us? They're not prepared. They wouldn't know what to say, half of them. I don't know how many of you were here when Art Smith came in and did the presentation for the DMC building. That was a great presentation. You understood why the building looks and is shaped and all of that, why. Now, you maybe don't like the colors, I don't like, whatever, but you understand why that building is the way it is. And I think that's all we're looking for is, yeah, convince us, this is a good piece of architecture.
John, is this the point where we should at least discuss, I know you put out that article about good design and form follows function. I thought it was really, really very telling and very educational. Could we incorporate some of that with these, or is that not appropriate?
Was that the about the residential
Right,
neighborhoods?
residential, right.
Yeah, well, again, my thought on that is, this is a big pie. We need to take baby steps here and because I think we hear the word flexibility. We have different, Troy's a big community, and there are different areas of Troy that we will treat differently. We have a Big Beaver corridor versus Maple Row, we've talked about that a lot. So I think we have to look at this maybe in pieces. Let's see if we can, because I hope the criteria for quality design applies to all districts. But what does that mean in each district could be a little different answer. Because what's good design on Big Beaver is not necessarily what we want to see on Maple or, yeah. So I think, looking at some framework, at some bones to what is good, the good design, the questions, and then if we need to make some adjustments as we look at the neighborhoods or the locations or the commercial versus residential, I think we can do that. So I don't think one fell swoop is going to cover all of what we should be considering.
So that leads into question 3, scope, threshold, geography. Should design regulations apply to any non-single family development? Should it apply to all applications for commercial, industrial, institutional, and multifamily?
Could I ask a different question?
Yeah.
What shouldn't it apply to?
Well, we're going to look at it a little bit differently in the chairs that we sit in.
I guess one question, or one way that I'm thinking of this question is, can you set a certain standard that you would apply to a project on Big Beaver, and say that these same standards apply to an individual homeowner who wants to build a custom home? Or are we taking it down to that level? I guess that's the question, right? Are we going residential or just residential development?
I think your argument is stronger for Big Beaver because we have a Big Beaver corridor district I went through the steps. We've got a master plan for that district. We've got design guidelines for that district. We've codified it in a zoning ordinance. We've already gone down the path of form-based code language. So it's certainly easier to justify strengthening those than it is to have the similar standards for single-family residential.
Planning Commission doesn't review you don't review a single-family residential unless it's part of a site condominium.
Right.
So I would take, that should be taken off the table to begin with.
Well,
That should be excluded.
There are cities that review everything. So if a homeowner buys an old dilapidated house, tears it down, builds a new house, they've got to go before the review board, the architectural design review committee, et cetera. I don't think we're there. I think we took some steps a few months ago, and we strengthened our variation in design provisions. Are they perfect? No. It's certainly not to the level of a design review board, but it helps to break up the monotony in single-family residential neighborhoods. Do we still have developers that maybe aren't pushing the bars high, sure, you're gonna have that. But do I think we should have strict or design standards for individual tear downs and rebuilds? I don't think so.
Yeah, just a point on that ordinance that requires every third house to be substantially different in.
That's what I'm talking
material.
about.
Right, and that one's excellent. The ordinance is well-written, but who's gonna be the judge to say this is substantially different? That's why I think the Satching Way thing failed, is because that standard was in place, the end product was almost identical as cookie cutter houses, and it was the review process of the design compared to the ordinance, who's gonna be the judge of, is that third house really different? And that's one element somehow we gotta give some more muscle to.
Well, that was the weaker standards. We've bolstered those standards up since that time, in part because of the photographs you took of that street.
So, Mr. Taylor, back to your question about what should be excluded, I mean, I think we have a feeling that single family should not be included. You know, the one that really questions industrial, something in the IB district.
Right.
Here's why he's bringing up industrial. As you know, when we updated our zoning ordinance in 2011, we had a lot of vacant properties that were industrially zoned. That we rezoned those, changed the zoning district to IB, integrated industrial and business. We created a very, very inclusive district where we nicknamed it internally Cowboy Town, where anything goes except single-family detached, and we wanted the market to determine how these buildings are going to be used. And to incentivize that, there's a provision in the ordinance, and it's why you don't see a lot of site plans in the IB district. If the property's zoned IB, and it's surrounded on all sides by property zoned IB, it's administrative site plan review. Now, most of those projects are just tweaks. There's maybe an addition at the back, or there's an addition at the front, or there's not a lot of tear downs and rebuilds, so we're not seeing a lot of that. But if we go down the road of all IB properties needing to go down this path, it's, depending on how we handle it, we could be taking away from that administrative approval.
Can I ask you, what opportunities lie in the IB district for change? And I mean, you know, I think we have, again, this walk before you learn how to run. I think what districts or what thoroughfares would have the biggest impact for this community? And what would make the biggest impact to the public at large as to, wow, there's some cool stuff happening in this town? I think those are the more of the low-hanging fruit than going after industrial. Having said that, I don't see any reason why good design can't apply to an industrial building as it could to a commercial fronting on Big Beaver. It'll be different standards, certainly. Good design doesn't stop because it's a single-family house or an industrial building or a restaurant. But I also want to be reasonable to think that, you know, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater just yet. Let's see if we can get this fine-tuned in an area that will have a big impact for this community. And if we feel that there are other opportunities in other zoning districts, start to look at what that might mean.
Well, I would say then that, I'm not trying to monopolize the conversation here, but most of the applications we are seeing are for Big Beaver. It is so we've got 3 form-based districts: Big Beaver, Maple, and the neighborhood nodes. Now, we haven't seen as much development in the nodes as I anticipated we would, but we are seeing some. They're already form-based districts. So the standard is already a little bit higher in those districts. We're also, I think, potentially going to see more along Rochester Road. It's a very, very busy thoroughfare. We've got, I think, somewhat untapped potential north of Waddles. We've got a zoning ordinance, a master plan that supports rezoning to multifamily and to office and to some other uses. I think, given the traffic of that road, and I think there's opportunity. We saw a daycare at the last meeting. I think there's opportunity along Rochester Road. If you're prioritizing, I would say that probably Big Beaver is our most important. But the other nodes are certainly important, and Rochester Road, I think, is
I
a
think that's
priority as
where we
well.
should focus our attention, in those high-impact thoroughfares or areas.
I agree.
Good too.
And I think we should raise the bar on Rochester Road, you know, not to say Big Beaver's their only great-looking piece of architectural, you know, streetscape. Rochester Road could use a lot of improvements as far as the quality of architecture on that avenue, and it is a major, super major artery. It really connects, you know, from I-75 to Rochester, and that's a giant area that needs, those buildings are 1950s, yes. That's okay.
And that's another thing, I don't think I said it very well. We've got some tired buildings there that are just, some of them are ready to be
Torn down.
torn down and redone. And it's a very busy road.
What about Livernois? Think about Livernois for a minute. You know, you've already extended the master plan form-based district clear up to the Amber Building, right? But why stop there? Because just a little north of there, you've got the church, 2 churches. You've got your historic village. You've got Walsh College. You've got the party store. I mean, it could continue to, I don't know, creep for a while, I guess, and certainly fill up from Waddles Road all the way down to the south. At Long Lake, you've got the Kroger and the Ace Hardware and the bank. And so I'm just saying, I certainly feel like there's probably more projects to come along Livernois. And you know, I don't think that they should be exempt from design standards. It's one of the gateway entrances into the Civic Center area.
Thoughts?
I agree. I think if we just limit these standards to Big Beaver, Rochester, and Maple, we'll find ourselves with projects on Livernois or other redevelopment areas that might come before the planning commission, where in hindsight, we'll say, what were we thinking? Why were we so limited
Well, that
to?
Livernois is part of that Big Beaver master
Up to-
plan district, but
Right, today up to Amber.
I'm just
but-
saying, I really think it's a matter of time
Mhm.
before Livernois gets a little more developed.
What may come out of this conversation is that we strengthen our approach, and we perhaps strengthen our design standards overall, but maybe there's more focus on some areas over others. And stated another way, these questions that we talked about, for lack of a different, we'll just call them the questions, the framing of the dialogue.
Capital T, capital Q. That
The questions. The question, potentially, we would go for a more comprehensive approach in the kind of the more bang for your buck areas. Well, we'd still ask the questions to all projects. So these, on John R. and on other areas, they're not getting off scot-free. They need to step up the game. But perhaps the approach is a little stronger in some of these other more busier areas. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Well,
sitting
I
here.
think some of those districts, the Big Beaver district demands
Yeah.
a little bit more than maybe something, elsewhere.
Right.
So, yeah, I think just by the nature of what the master plan says, what's developed there, we'll start to set where that, is this a little different answer to the question than this one is over on another location?
But overall, the bar has to be raised.
Yeah.
Overall,
Correct.
without question.
Karen bringing up the Livernois corridor, I don't know, what does our master plan say for that corridor?
Well, most of what Ms. Cruz brought up, those are all neighborhood nodes, and so really it talks about neighborhood node development where it's mostly just at the major mile intersections going all the way up.
Nothing between the nodes?
No, I mean, those are kind of infill with single-family residential, and you have some institutional uses like churches and the Walsh
Yeah, but
College.
there's like 2 little houses left. And
Between Waddles and Big Beaver on Livernois, yeah.
and then Brian Waddle's house there at
Right.
the corner.
But all the major mile intersections are all master planned and zoned from neighborhood node developments.
Going back to when that concept was it developed saying, hey, we're just going to focus on the intersection and and just kind of let the intersections do what they're gonna do, and what's between the intersections not? I mean, if we develop the nodes now, should we now, the next time around the block, look at, okay, what happens between the nodes? Or did we do that and just say, no, the best thing that can happen between these two nodes is either what's there or?
Well, that's how we got Amber.
Well, it depends on the nodes, and it depends on what's
Right,
the
right,
characters. So, for example, at the time, 2008, Crooks and Waddles, there was nothing
Right.
that,
Nothing.
non-resident, there was nothing except residential on that corner,
Right.
and an old house.
Right.
And we knew it was residential in character, so we knew, but we wanted to see it, there's some investment there, but we knew it had to be appropriate. We couldn't, drive-throughs wouldn't be a fit.
Right.
Industrial wouldn't be a fit, some of these more intense things. So we wanted to keep that scale more residential and kind of character. And surrounding it would be all residential in the cemetery. But in other areas, like along Rochester Road, we've got nodes, but then between the nodes, that area can be rezoned to multifamily, to office, to commercial. So it really,
So we
it
did-
depends on the context of the area around the nodes.
I was just wondering, on the Livernois corridor, what is happening between the nodes, let's say between Big Beaver and Waddles, or Waddles and Longley?
Well, Ms. Cruz is correct. From between Big Beaver and Waddles, particularly on the east side, is really kind of a mixed bag. I mean, we've got the Stonecrest and the dog park and the church and the Walsh.
Couple of
and
houses.
Couple of houses and.
And the spa, the Renaissance Spa's right
Yeah.
there on the corner, and the one office building.
Yeah, but as you hit Waddles and go north of there, it's, with some exceptions, it's essentially concentration at the corners and residential between, with some outliers.
Well, I guess where I'm going with my question is
Yeah.
that the right answer? I mean, Livernois is a thoroughfare, should that be a single-family residential properties along that thoroughfare? At some point, as you get further out, maybe that's okay when you get back to a two-lane road, but when you've got 2 lanes north or 2 lanes south with a center turn lane, and
Mhm.
you've got these developments along the way, I'm just thinking that over time, it's going to turn over. And should we be more proactive to what we want it to be,
Mhm.
as opposed to a developer coming in and saying, we want to do this?
So now you're gonna throw in rezoning and mass planning properties as part of this whole discussion?
No, that's a sidebar.
Okay.
But the same holds true for John R. I mean, John R. it gets a lot of traffic. It's not quite the 4 lanes with the center turning lane, but, again, matter of time.
Mhm.
And there's certainly a lot of developable, if that's a word, property along John R.
Mhm.
There is.
Yep.
Well, one thought I had, I don't know where this would come into play and how, in terms of raising the bar, to somehow incentivize the bar in some ways. Instead of making everything, gotta enforce it here, enforce it this way, enforce it this way, create some incentives where the developers are gonna come and present something because they're actually getting something back for those incentives, for providing that. I think that's one approach that has proven with other projects to be a win-win.
Are you talking monetary?
Not necessarily monetary, maybe
You're talking cluster?
cluster, flexibility in development, flexibility in density, flexibility in massing, flexibility in, for example, maybe the nodes standards being very strict with what can go in there, what cannot. Provide some, incentivize the development where the developer will come in and say, okay, we upped our architecture, our creativity, our design up a notch, a few notches, so.
But in return for?
In return to the developer, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, if you're
in
talking
return?
about incentivizing, if they come in and they say, we've upped the standards, but then what do they get in
Maybe in return for the strict form-based guidelines that are in existence today, to provide flexibility there, where they're very strict, I don't know if that, or incentives or in some other ways, but just the concept of incentivizing something.
Am I wrong to think that Troy is now such a desirable community in which to live, work, and play that we're really past having to incentivize people to come here?
Well, I think, yes, there's some truth in that. I think also, in terms of zoning, our Big Beaver form-based district is very incentivized. We allow density and height that we're not even seeing right now. And so I appreciate the idea to do incentives. I'm not sure what other incentives we can give people to build more or better. We are giving away a lot in terms of already allowing a lot of permissibility, and also our process is simple. I mean, hopefully it's a one meeting planning commission and they're on their way. So yes, I think we can always try to offer and find incentives, but the hard part about that is finding what is the incentive to allow to make them do what we want them to do. And so it's a challenge.
I thought it was more for areas that currently don't have incentives that Big Beaver have today. Big Beaver, I guess, is very heavily incentivized. So to create that spark, probably just a thought. The neighborhood nodes don't have that incentives that Big Beaver has, and so maybe a new level of incentive, maybe not the degree of Big Beaver, but kind of the path that Big Beaver was taken on to actually create that spark and that development rush that happened in the past, I guess, 5-7 years.
Ollie, the context in which you're using the words incentives, creating incentives in a neighborhood node, for example, are you using that synonymously with flexibility?
Yes, that's kind of
Because to me, incentive is a different word than flexible.
What I'm thinking of incentive is more of the way it's presented on Big Beaver, right? The way developers are incentivized on Big Beaver is they're allowed to do multi-use development, where before those incentives were given, they were very limited in what they can actually do.
Are our neighborhood nodes that limited? I wasn't under the impression that they were that limited.
They're not. They are pretty flexible, and I think the challenge in neighborhood nodes is most of them are adjacent to single-family residential, so we need to also ensure that we
Right.
protect single-family. And that's the same thing with on Rochester, and a lot of our corridors, they back up, for example, the self-storage building that was approved, there was a lot of pushback from the adjacent. So we have to be very, very, very sensitive to where these properties are in context if we do offer incentives, flexibility, whatever term you want to use, because from our understanding, unless you're going to give a developer some monetary incentive, the thing they're looking for mostly is density, height, and a quick process. We've done that. We're really good at those three things for the most part.
And Big Beaver offers that now.
And Big Beaver offers that now. So yes, we are always looking for ways to regulatory flexibility or incentives too. So yeah, if it's something that we would definitely pursue. But again, we don't want to do that and jeopardize, adjacent single family or adjacent residential to these development areas.
I think the concept is an interesting one, and it's really food for thought. The challenge, I think, with that overall is it's very difficult to quantify architectural quality. And how do you measure something that's subjective? It's an interesting concept, though.
Right, and the same thought I had for redevelopment on Rochester Road, which has been lagging compared to Big Beaver, and how to actually ignite that fire.
Right.
Same idea of incentivizing
Right.
some ways to bring those old structures and everything that just all sizes and heights and shapes all over the spectrum, and with Rochester Road,
Yep.
kind of the same thought.
I think we've answered most of these. I think it sounds like the trigger is going to be if a project has to go in front of the planning commission. That sounds like if it's a building addition, 2,000 square foot building addition, should that, does that trigger? And it's difficult to answer that now because we really don't know what the process is, but just something to think about is the more that these apply to administratively, the more process we have to
Going to slow
deal
the
with
process
administratively,
down.
potentially.
Yeah.
So the form of the design regulations, are these actual standards, are they advisory guidelines, are they design policy? It sounds
Or a
like,
combination of these.
Do the latter two, what's the strength of the advisory guidelines of the design policy?
so the strongest, the most teeth is the standards, and as you go down, there's less teeth and.
The standards are an actual requirement.
That's correct.
Go in the zoning ordinance, or some ordinance,
Mhm.
yep.
The guideline is a strong recommendation. And a policy is, boy, we've discussed that we'd really like you to do this. It's the direction we'd like you to go in.
That's where we've been. We've tried design policy.
Weasel.
Yeah. I think I'm hearing standards.
That's what I think. That's what, yeah, that's.
Ben, can you share with us from your experience what you've seen in other communities? Are there more communities with standards, with policies?
It's really it's all over the board.
It is,
I mean,
okay.
they really, and John's worked in plenty of communities too. It's all over the board. I will tell you, standards are the most difficult to write. Policies are the easiest to write. Especially when you're dealing with these issues, because it's hard to write a standard where there is a lot of subjectivity to it. But it is all over the board. For example, Ann Arbor, when I was the director, or serving as the director in Ann Arbor, they had design guidelines, and they had a design review committee that reviewed those under design policy. So they used kind of a double form there to review projects. I'm writing design standards for the city of Huntington Woods right now. They wanted very strict standards that they review. And they review single-family homes. That's 95% of what they review. But they wanted to say it has to be 75% brick or whatever the number is. So they go that specific. What they had done to pass it didn't work for them was they actually had a design policy that they would use to evaluate projects. So it really is a temperature of the community and a temperature of what the planning commission, how much teeth do you want and how well can we write these standards, if that's the road we're going down, to allow you the flexibility to really judge projects, but also when it actually comes in Alan's realm is how defensible are these going to be? How much do we open ourselves up for liability if we start turning projects down because they don't meet these somewhat subjective standards?
So if we
So
went.
I'm sorry, we would have a potential legal liability if we decline a project that didn't meet a standard?
The standards would have to be very specific, because if.
Sure.
Because if you give too much discretion to the planning commission, it could be challenged. Because if you give unbridled, the word is unbridled discretion, whatever that means. At some point, if you think that there's no clear standard for the reviewing board to vote yes or no, it's going to be challenged and it could be shut down. So,
I guess I was asking because I thought we were leaning toward having standards, or we were talking about.
You can have standards, they just have to be,
They'd have to be specific.
They can't include unbridled discretion.
Right.
Well, so let me give you an
It seems
example.
like-
Let me give you an
Go
example.
ahead,
So
please.
everyone here, we all, we talk about quality, want quality. It's very hard to write a
Quality
measurable
standard.
objective or standard as what does quality mean. You can write it very easily in a design policy statement or a kind of a guideline statement, but when you actually get to standards, it's very hard to write that. And then that's where it comes into question as well. Mr. Tagle might think that was high quality, but Mr. Krent might not.
I see. Okay.
So I'm just saying that if we go down the roads of actually writing standards, we're gonna have to be very, very, we're gonna have to really think these out and kind of formulate what these really mean. So-
Does that not same thing apply to create, the use of the word creativity and variety?
Sure.
Those are.
Reasonable. Now,
those are
there's
subject-
something people like to argue about.
Oh, yeah.
I think you just brought up a good point here with quality. There's the aspect of architectural and design quality, and then there's the aspect of actual the building science quality, where you actually get into the actual constructability of so you can have the same quality material, give them to two different builders, and they will build two different quality structures. So now, that's kind of like a gray area where can you write a standard on the quality of building science actually being implemented in the field, so it's no longer architectural quality, it's how was the structure really built. Now we're going to the building department. We're crossing over there.
So if we went to the world of advisory guidelines, right? We didn't have standards, but we had these advisory guidelines, something more than what we've been working with, maybe something less than a standard that Alan would have to defend. If we look at a project and we find that the architect, the developer have not met what we've determined to be the advisory guidelines, and we want to say no thank you, how would that get accomplished?
Or would it
Or
still
would
be,
it?
or
Well,
would
yeah.
it still be
Make it worse.
defensible, right? If you said no.
If it's a guideline, it's a guideline, and if you deny a site plan because of an advisory guideline, that's not defensible, because,
Okay.
because it's a guideline.
I appreciate your advice.
Okay.
Thanks. I'll ignore it, but I do appreciate it.
Well, so then, as much as I feel like standards are the least flexible option, and we talked here today about wanting flexibility, it sounds like it's the only option to be able to make sure you get what you want.
I think you said to have the teeth, like we
I
keep
think
talking about.
I think you can have standards that aren't rigid. It's not like, okay, standards for, if you're gonna build a vehicle, you've gotta have certain hardness on the steel and all that. Those are standards that are mathematical and scientific. We don't have to have scientific standards applied to architecture. I think we could have some wording that gives some teeth to a quality design and creativity without getting into it's gotta be, use only brick or only some other material. So I think there's a way to do it, way to write it. He's a great writer.
And Alan will defend him.
Great luck.
Well, I will tell you, there's, and I'm be forthright, and Brent will tell you the same thing, there's no magic bullet to this. I mean, there's no magic design bullets. There will be debate and discussion on all of this, and there'll be debate and discussion with the applicants when they get up here and say, I don't agree with your finding of my standard that it's not quality or whatever. So, but I think we have a good sense of kind of what direction you want to go with that element.
You don't see me from
No,
down
go
there.
ahead.
You have to
Open,
speak
open.
up.
You speak up.
It's open.
You remember you took a trip to Carmel and a few other places? Did they have standards? I know that you gave us the guidelines that Ann Arbor and Birmingham have, and I think.
Boy, what a great question. I think Carmel had some districts that had standards, yes.
Can you,
And they also had a very, I think the quick answer is yes.
okay.
But I think they had, the enabling legislation is a little bit different there, and I believe they had the equivalent of a design review committee that was all appointed by the mayor. And the mayor made sure to get qualified people on the committee, I'll put it that way.
I want to be careful too when we look at some of the developments that they went and saw, the one in Carmel and other places. Those are mostly town centers, and those are much easier because to write standards, or because they're basically being designed from the ground up, large areas. This is we're it's a little unique. Big Beaver's different than Rochester, so. That's why those areas are a little bit easier to write standards for and have a review than it would be some a little more organic place like the Big Beaver or Rochester, etc.
Would it also be different state to state? I mean, how much does state regulations affect what we do at the city level? Carmel's in Indiana, we're here.
I'd say it's more, it varies more from community to community. Like one of my favorite cities in the world is Charleston, South Carolina. If anyone who's been there, the history there is you set foot in the city and you know that they've got something special. It's historically significant. So they've got, I'm sure they have a design review committee or historic preservation committee, and they they're gonna have probably very, very rigid standards. It's gonna probably get down to the paint color and the door knocker design and the et cetera, because we're not Charleston, South Carolina. But we do have a character, we've got a master plan that defines what we are, and we've got, like I said, for Big Beaver, we've got a corridor study and et cetera. So, I mean, I think that there's room here for improvement, obviously, and I think, you know, I think we can come up with an approach that's gonna work across the board for the whole city, as well as some of these more specific areas.
So the last, I think, question 5. It sounds like, and I could be wrong, that this is something that the planning commission would rather kind of handle as part of the site plan review process.
In-house?
In-house rather.
To start with, yes.
Yeah, I don't want to have a separate committee at this point.
No.
I'd say we can do it.
Okay.
Just tell the mayor to hire a few more architects.
Could I ask an unrelated question? How does all this quality and design standards fit in with the Sustainable Design Committee? Would they be merged, or is it still, because they do similar functions and
At this point, I didn't even think of that.
but
I need to think about that before
we
I.
certainly support sustainable
Yeah.
design. And it's a way to incentivize, as you say, you know, to give a developer for providing, going beyond what's required.
I hadn't thought of relating the two. Let me think about it. I think
Okay.
that's an interesting question.
Is that and I heard from most of them, is that the consensus that this would be done in-house, or not in-house, but
Yes.
in the planning commission?
Yes.
Part of the site plan
Not
review
a
process?
separate committee yet, at this time.
Did you have any other thought to actually, that it would be more efficient to start from scratch and appoint a committee, or would you tend to think that it would be more streamlined if it was part of the actual review process to have that just an extra step of the planning commission?
It's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Procedurally, it'd be much easier if it was done at the planning commission level. It's more efficient for both yourself and the applicant. So, yeah.
Procedurally, right now mentally I'm doing cartwheels. Because another committee means another agenda, another set of minutes, and more appointments, more.
More administrative.
Yeah, but to play the other side, you know, you could come up with a committee that's comprised of architects and designers and engineers and whatever, you know, professionals who do this for a living. And there is value in separating this issue from the planning commission and focusing on design. I mean, planning commission also has to worry about the curb cuts and traffic counts and all these other things. And getting a different set of eyes to provide input into the process, there is value there.
If you make me focus just on curb cuts, I'm done.
Trash is still yours.
Trash is, but yeah, the curb cuts and the traffic and
Right.
that minute, no, I'm done.
So,
Done.
I mean, I'll just tell you, like, Ann Arbor has a separate design review board. They are independent planning commission. They are appointed by the mayor. They are required by their bylaws to be 2 architects, 2 landscape architects, a downtown property owner, a developer, and a contractor and engineer.
You read that all.
They meet 2 weeks prior to the planning commission. The next item is on the planning commission agenda. They meet during the day. People are required to only go once to them. They can either take their suggestions or they don't have to take their suggestions. But a report from the design review committee goes to the planning commission at that next meeting when the project goes in front of them, and the planning commission can say, hey, you didn't do this, or you did do that, why and why not? And that's how that process works. But again, there's no standards they work off guidelines for all their projects.
Is that more legally defensive than if we take it on ourselves?
I don't think it really matters one way or the other.
The standards are gonna have to be well-written.
Right.
As someone who sits on a planning commission in another community, I would rather have that authority. If not given that authority, I would hope that the committee would be advisory, maybe non-binding, so I could hear what they have to say, hear the recommendation, but then make a determination as a board member on the project.
But Birmingham, Bloomfield Township, they have a binding design review committee. That you gotta meet their requirements for this color door, or whatever it may be. Independent of what the planning commission ends up saying, so it's different, it's basically the threshold of what the community wants to take on. Anything else that we should talk about?
What are the next steps?
Well, it sounds like Karen wants a complete draft by, in 2 weeks, so.
I'll get right on that.
The questions, just the questions.
What, and again, we're taking an approach like we did with the cluster ordinance and the wilderness preservation. We're gonna take this and, this is really good direction. I think the next step is the questions and to start coming up with some verbiage for some of these suggestions.
So it'll be the same thing. We'll have to pass, review them here, make our suggestions, approve them, and then you'll have to set it for hearing. You have to send out, your notice and blah, blah, blah. It'll have to go in front of city council.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
At least we started, right?
I feel like we could get it done by the end of the year.
But that's impossible, isn't it?
Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm totally serious.
I want to make sure you get this right,
Yeah.
so I don't know.
Oh, I don't disagree. But I have faith and optimism. That
We'll try our best,
you'll work your magic.
we'll try our best.
Okay, I guess that kind of wraps up our discussion. Thanks, Ben and Brent, for the great
No, thank you for your input. This is-
Oh, I have one other question. So, since we have everyone here together, so until some of this begins to get implemented, and in particular the design standards, and we're just working from the questions, how do we proceed going forward? I mean, are we gonna try and ease into what we think will be sort of a bigger change as a body of commissioners? Are we going to just, if we get a project that's in front of us that we don't really like and can't come up with a reason to say no, go, okay. I mean, how do we want to handle this as we're operating in the gray area?
Well, I don't think
Or
you can, until it's actually finalized and be approved by the city council, I don't think we can impose those on intermediate projects. Is that what your question is?
No, we're not going to be able to propose them on intermediate projects, but are we going to take a little bit tougher stance? Are we going to just?
You know what we could do? Once we get the questions, we can start applying that to developers coming in and see how they respond.
Yeah, because aren't the questions part of the application process? So those can be done administratively, right?
Yep. Well, that was part of the application process, and then you will receive a copy of whatever they respond back with, and
Let the applicant know that that quality is very important to the planning commission, and they need to take the best foot forward, and they need to bring 3D renderings and samples, and here's some questions you're gonna wanna think about, and you're gonna wanna present. I mean,
I think we're mentally ready for the next project that comes before us that might be substandard to the discussion we had here tonight. So when the next one comes along, I think we might have additional input that we didn't have up until now, based on what we discussed here tonight, what we're anticipating, without necessarily the legal teeth enforcement, but at least the input that we can bring to the table to try to generate some improvements or creativity on behalf of the applicant.
Yeah, and then we get feedback from the applicant.
Right.
For our questions, we will modify questions as we see they work or don't work.
So, I just want to see if I had like the right understanding of what this is. So, the questions would be like a filter to see that applicants have thoughtful projects and information for like mutual understanding between developers and us. And then the standards would be what the body could use to justify saying no. So they're two different things.
Well, I heard that a lot. You were the first one to say it, saying no, saying no, saying no. I mean, the goal here is to get good development. So I would say the standards, I would rephrase the question, that the standards would help us to get the desired type of project that we want to see.
But if the body would have wanted to say no, the standards would be what you would use.
The standards would be applied, and if the application did not meet the standards, they would not get approved.
I think maybe another way to rephrase that is future projects would have, instead of, today we're saying yes to this standard, tomorrow we'll say yes to this standard, instead of no here and no here. Today we're saying yes here, tomorrow we're gonna say yes here.
The intent is to increase the overall quality of architecture and design in the city.
That makes
By
sense.
December 31st.
Or else.
Here goes Christmas.
I could resist.
Well, no, you can enjoy Christmas, because our last meeting for the year will be before Christmas.
All right, there goes Thanksgiving.
I mean, you want a sooner deadline, or?
Yeah.
There goes Halloween.
Item number 9, I guess we can move to item number 9, public comment. Nobody in the audience for public comment on the agenda. Planning Commission comments, item number 10. Start with Mr. Faison.
Nothing from me.
Mr. Daigle.
Thank you.
Ms. Cooper.
So September 12th is our next planning commission meeting? Right?
Is that a question?
Yeah, no, I'm asking. And you're planning to meet for dinner instead of Sai Tai? Would you like to meet at Nihi's?
Oh, we can do that. Sure.
Okay, I will meet you at Nihi's, and anyone else that wants to
We meet early.
join.
Send me a remind
I
me.
will send a reminder to you.
Yeah.
Cool.
That sounds good.
Okay, Mr. Sanzika.
I'm-
I keep driving my corporate drive in Crooks and see no activity there. A lot of material just sitting and nothing being done. Can you give us an update on
We've addressed the blight with the developer, and he indicated, he sent me an email today. I looked at it and I forget exactly what it said. He's hired, I reviewed building plans for the project, the middle building. I know there's plans that have already been reviewed and approved for the restaurant to the north. I think you're gonna see activity soon. He indicated activity was gonna start very soon. I forget the date. But we are aware of the situation. We're concerned with that property as well as the Met Hotel property across the street. Both properties, it's unacceptable, and we're working with the developers, both developers to clean them up. I'm hoping we're gonna see construction activity very soon. The fees are paid, the materials are on the site, and he indicated he hired a contractor, and he gave me a date earlier today, I forget what it was. Hopefully we see activity very soon.
You mentioned the developer of the Met Hotel property. Is it the developer or is it the property owner?
The owner of the
Okay.
Met Hotel.
Okay, I didn't know if there was a plan,
Yeah,
development plan.
no, unfortunately, there's not.
Yeah.
But that property is,
No, it's,
Beyond-
I go by there every day too.
Yeah,
so,
it's not.
Is it
It's
for
an
sale?
eyesore, yeah.
it was purchased by,
Was it at Sienna?
yes,
Was the Sienna Healthcare people?
I believe they still own it. But I believe that they, based on their,
Are those the people that,
So the Sienna Healthcare people are now the owner who are letting the property go to seed.
I believe they're still the owner. I believe that they do not have a certificate of need from the state for assisted living there. And hopefully that property ends up in the hands of a developer who's gonna do something soon. It's a priority of the city to get that site cleaned up, get that building down and get that site cleaned up.
Is there any news on the Kmart site?
None that I'm aware of. Only what I read in the paper, but you probably read the same articles I do.
there's rumors and talk that
Mhm.
they might have a project sometime at the end of the year. I know, I suspect that they're influenced by this whole thing with the ballot question. You know, they wanted to make sure that the Civic Center campus wouldn't compete with their project, and so now, since they've withdrawn all the RFQs, and the Civic Center project is definitely on hold, so.
Ms. Howe?
Well, this has been one of my favorite meetings, and it's meetings like these that make me really value being on the planning commission, because it's just really cool to understand the change that's happening.
One of my favorite meetings, too. I'm excited about, the direction that we're headed, so. Mhm. I'll find a new drum to bang here soon, so I don't want anybody to worry.
You always do.
And they put 5 more bricks today on Eagles Building.
We saw a guy working out there today.
Yeah.
One brick at a time.
One brick at a time.
One guy, huh?
I have a question about the Amber project.
Oh, good, someone other than me.
This meeting just keeps getting better and better.
No, and I have to remember one other one too. Is he actually doing anything at the other site that we approved? Because somebody said there's activity going on down there. And I had the impression that the city council and the mayor were all very vehement in that this project on Civic Center Drive would be completed before there was anything done on that other project. I see activity on there.
I believe because I don't monitor it that closely, I believe the activity you've seen was, the site was cleared and the underground utilities were put in. I don't, there's been activity.
How is that different? At least that's my project, my complaint. How is that any different? Couldn't he use those people who are putting in the site utilities to work on this other project that's now over 3 years old?
Probably.
That's
They're
just-
different contractors.
What?
They're different people. They're-
Yeah.
Bricklayers are different than underground
At
contractors.
this point, they seem to be caught up in the brick lane, because it's taken forever. It's,
It's just kind of an embarrassment, and I think people who signed the petition attested to that, saying, look at there, that project is taking forever. So, I think it just gives us a bad name.
someone told me today that the new Little Caesars Arena was completed quicker than
Yes.
Amber Apartments.
That puts it all in perspective, right? The other question I had was, I just wanted to remind any planning commissioners who haven't signed, you got a thing from Beth Tashnik about a joint planning commission, city council meeting.
Yeah, respond.
And I talked to her the other day, and she said there's still several commissioners as well as city council people who haven't responded, so if you haven't, please get that in. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Motzny?
No comments, thanks.
Mr. Carlisle? No comments. Mr. Solano? Yeah, thank you, Mr. Edmonds, for that reminder. I think as soon as everybody responds, they
Their
can
dates
schedule
in-
that meeting.
Their date's in October, there's 3 dates.
The 3 October
Right.
dates, right?
Right. Yeah, I just want to thank Ben and Brent again for tonight's presentation and for
Bravo.
getting us started on the path to some newer standards, higher standards. for us.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for thank you for the discussion. That was very helpful and helps us a lot moving forward. Thank you.
If there are no other comments or questions, then we are adjourned for tonight. Thank you.